See, we have a system that would not like to see black males and black females together. They would not like to see that happening at all. Because once we come together, they understand the power of the strength of the black woman, the queen of the universe. They know that, her strength. They also know the power of the black male, the warrior. If you would turn him loose, he will protect also his family and things that need to be done.
What's good, y'all? Hope everybody's well. Welcome to the Onyx Report's Black Masculinist news for the day. And I'm going to hit you with one that's a little more esoteric than usual. That was Dr. Julia Hare, noted psychologist, also noted womanist, a brilliant speaker. If you get a chance to check her out, that was her on one of Tavis Smiley's joints back in the day. She passed away not too long ago due to Alzheimer's, if I'm not mistaken. So peace to her. But I play that because I've talked about it before, not in any way to disparage Dr. Hare, right? But mainly to talk about a phenomenon in the black community that tends to go unaddressed. And that is this perception, even in myth, even in metaphor, of black male subservience and black male inferiority, right? So you notice, and she was speaking positively about both black men and women. She was talking about the kind of, issues in place and those who benefit from those issues that keep men and women in the black community separate, that in many ways profit off of the gender war. And she's correct about all of that. This is something Kevin Samuels talks about, whole industries that profit from families that aren't together, And so she's correct, but notice in the way she frames, even in metaphor, even in myth, the highest possibility of what it means to be black woman and black man. She frames it as, in regard to women, as the goddesses, the queens of the universe, you know what I mean? But then when she gets to men, she talks about them as the warriors. Well, it's interesting, because who exactly is the queen's counterpart? Is it the warrior or the king? See, that's the difference here. That's the issue. We don't have a conceptualization for black men in their highest state, because that would put womanhood in question. It would put womanhood in a secondary state because the king is above the queen. We can't have that. So instead, she invokes the warrior. And in that context, what I think of is a beehive, where you have a queen and you have warrior drones. Right? This is precisely what we have. And this is exacerbated by a number of different issues, pop culture as well, not just internal to the black community. But it speaks to something that I was watching recently. So I was watching American Gods, which is in its third season, right? This is a strange series written by Neil Gaiman, dealing with gods that, and by the way, there will be some spoilers, so it is what it is. If you don't know that, I don't know what to tell you. But if you don't want to hear any spoilers, you can check out now. But anyway, as far as the spoilers are concerned, American Gods is in its third season, and it's basically a series about gods that live among us. And when they are no longer worshipped, they are depowered and have to figure out a way to exist as does everyone else. And if anything, they find new ways to receive worship, but receive it in, non-direct ways. You know what I mean? So what you'll find is the series is led by Odin. And Odin, one day at the very beginning of season 1, comes to get this appearingly black male who gets out of prison and, hires him kind of as a bodyguard. Long story short, turns out to be his son. And, they go about, going through all these adventures that have to do with the old gods going to war with the new gods. So, you have gods like Odin. Thor makes an appearance for one episode. They have all the gods of the ancient world that have been brought over to the new world. They even have Jesus at the end of season 1, if I'm not mistaken, who comes in a lot of different forms, right? And they fight the new gods of technology, the new gods of social media, the new gods of, even internet porn, which is actually an old god that's reconfigured, and we'll get to her in a minute. So they have all these, kind of gods there, and they're at war with one another, the old and the new. And this is based off a book I did not read. I've just been watching the series, but I do have friends that have. So it's been interesting. And of course, they've broken away from the book in various forms, so on and so forth. But the series is actually starred, the star of the series, I should say, is technically Odin's son, right? Who is named Shadow Moon. And from what we're given, he's half black and half Norse, right? We find that out later. And he's played by an actor named Ricky Whittle. Now, Ricky is, he's an English actor. And the old trope about ADOS actors not getting parts is real, you know? So this is Ricky. I don't know what the hell. I don't know what's going on with Ricky's hair. It's weird. It reminds me. Just rock with it, player. I mean, you cool right there. This mess. I don't know what you're doing. This whole third season, he's been looking like this. It looks weird. Usually, he's bald head or maybe somewhere around this, which is cool. But it reminds me of Keenan Lonsdale, who is an actor that plays in the CW's Flash. Plays Wally West, who in the comics was a Caucasian kid with red hair. Keenan is basically, he's from Australia, a Nigerian father, Australian mother, you know, so you have the same kind of, non-ADOS dynamic. Same with Ricky Whittle. Ricky, though, is from England. His father's Jamaican, his mother's English. So, you know, you have these characters brought in from other places, you know. But beyond that, the hair thing, fellas, just rock with it. I mean, you'd be all right. You know, just rock with it. It is what it is. You look confused. But anyway. So, you know, you have a number of black gods that have made their presence in the last few seasons. You've had Anansi, the spider, who was probably the season's most popular, or I shouldn't even say the series most popular. You can look up a speech he gave on a slave ship that was acted and performed extremely well. So go check that out. That's here on YouTube. Just put in Anansi, put in American Gods, and you can put in slave ship. You'll probably find it that way. Nevertheless, there have been a few. There have been a couple from Egypt. Not necessarily played up the way black folk would have played them up, but they're there nonetheless. And you even get some in the New Orleans area that kind of touch on a number of traditions, right? These two here, so this is Ricky, who's technically a demigod on the left, but he's not coming as a known character. And on the right, you have Bilquist. And the actress who plays Bilquist is actually quite good. I mean, many have argued that she should play Storm in whatever upcoming X-Men series that comes about. And I agree. I think she looks the part more than any other actress that's played her. So I think it would work. But Bilquist in this one is kind of the goddess of sexuality. And she literally sucks people into her vagina, which transports them to, you know, just a blank space in space, literally, like they're just floating in space. You know, she absorbs them through her vagina. I'm not playing about that anyway. But this season they kind of link her to a series of goddesses, so to speak. And basically what they do is they kind of formally introduce the Orishas, right? And the Orishas in this series come about in season 3, and there are a number of them, right? There are a number of them that come about. The main ones that we see are these 3 here, right? Oshun, Yemaya, and Aye, right? And they kind of play out throughout a number of different episodes across the season, and then they connect with Bilquist and some kind of black goddess, you know, network. And we don't find out what that black goddess network really is yet. They're implying that Bilquist has a connection to them. We know it has to do with Africa, since that's where they all hail, but we don't know much about how. Let me see something. I don't know if I'll be able to find it, but it reminds me of another situation that a number of us on my show last summer, I want to say, we talked about. Yeah, they don't show her. Let me see. I was trying to see if I can find her. It's from the Watchmen series, and at one point they have a black goddess in space, and I can't seem to find her right now. They only showed her for a quick second, but it was reminiscent of that. So you have this kind of veneration of the black woman in popular media and the linkage to her most divine state, right? But the interesting thing I found is, even in this episode, or the last few episodes, they didn't really touch on any of the male goddesses or gods, or the Orishas in this context, right? Now they did have a couple that showed their face for a moment, but they were in the background. So here you had Iku on the left and Shango on the right. Shango probably being the most familiar, the most, kind of famous, especially to those who are not practitioners, right? But they show up for a brief moment, but they're not there long. Right. Matter of fact, one of them makes this, the one on the left, is kind of inviting this older woman into her death because he is supposed to be the Orisha that deals with that. And she kind of, dismissively dismisses him. Shango is in the background, and they might as well have given him a broom and a mop. I mean, for the most part, they kind of centered on 4 goddesses, right? And kind of just focused on that. And what I found interesting about that, when I began to look at it, is the ways in which, even in metaphor, the highest state that black males can see themselves in is often denounced in some way, shape, or form. Hell, I mean, even Shadow Moon, the main character of the series, who technically is a black demigod, has no association whatsoever with African American history or culture, even as a character, let alone as the actor himself. No connection whatsoever. He starts to identify himself in terms of his Norse lineage as a character in the series, way more than anything having to do with any African lineage. So I find it interesting. So along lineage grounds, you have that kind of dynamic. Along gender grounds, you have the proliferation of goddesses and Orishas, female or feminine Orishas, but the downplaying of the sacred masculine, as it were. And you can call it the masculine, you can call it the gods, but see, I don't limit it to just the metaphysics of the dynamic. I don't limit it to the metaphors of the gods and goddesses. I find that across the board, whether we're talking about history, whether we're talking about politics, whether we're talking about economics, whether we're talking about metaphor, whether we're talking about sci-fi, in every context that I can think of, I find that it seems to be a necessity to downplay the black male, most particularly in his most powerful state. Even when we imagine what it is, it has to be downplayed. He's relegated to the background. He's relegated to a subservient position consistently and overwhelmingly across the board. And I don't hear anybody really talk about it. These are one of the many things that I wondered for years. Am I crazy? Because I'm seeing things and nobody else is saying anything about them. And it wasn't until I started speaking out that I found that there were more men that were like, nah, you're not alone. We noticed it. We're talking about it over here too, but we're talking about it in siloed, separate positions. And it's time to come together and actually lay it out and look at what it is we're talking about. Because it on one level, it's white supremacy, but it goes beyond that, right? Especially on gender grounds. Now, we can talk about the ways in which, the white media industry has helped to venerate black women over black men. We can talk about that. That is a factor in this, and it is a factor that helps to downplay black men, even in the imagination. I'm going to put a link in the description box of a panel discussion. It's about an hour, and it's on the Roger Report. And this is something that BGS, who is a regular on my weekly live show on Wednesday nights, 5 o'clock Pacific, he was having a conversation with a young man who was having difficulty accepting that his mother really in many ways brainwashed him against his own father. It was a really interesting conversation. And the young man himself, even when he was getting frustrated and trying to find way after way of defending his mother, wouldn't let the conversation end, even when he was hurt, even when his feelings were hurt, because he said it himself, he knew this was something he needed to hear. His mother's negative influence had such power in his own mind that it shaped his perspective of his father and thus himself. His father being weak, his father being, unable to cut it, even though his father was an extremely good man. He had taken upon and internalized his mother's narrative about his father and thus himself. Patterned himself after his mother, even though he knew his mother was highly problematic. But this goes on in the black community. We worship the sacred mother. Now, you can say you're an atheist, you're not metaphysical in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't change the dynamic. in the black community, we not only are led by a gynocracy, we're led by a gynocracy that's raised us men in particular to worship the feminine. Put it to you this way, and because worship can mean a lot of different things. One of the first things you learn as a young boy is not to hit girls, even if she's hitting you and y'all are the same strength. That's one of the first lessons you learn. I remember being on the playground. This girl hit me. I hit her back. My mother snatched me, whooped me, and told me, don't ever lay your hands on girls. And I'm thinking, she just popped me in the jaw, and it hurt, but it didn't matter, right? Because that was the earliest stage of venerating the feminine, right? And by the time we transitioned into a single parent household, it was all about the feminine, right? Because between her and my female family members, there were all kinds of little critiques about how I was acting and how I treated girls and how I thought about women. No conversation about what it meant to be men. There were no men present to talk about what it meant. Many of us learned about manhood through the imagination of women that didn't have men. And so they taught you how to be the man they wanted, but they couldn't teach you what being a man was. It's kind of like building a car, but you don't know what the engine is. You don't know how to put together the transmission, the brakes. You don't know how to do that. You just know how it looks on the outside. So you get this nice car with shiny colors, but no engine, because you're mimicking what it looks like, but you don't know how it works on the internal. You don't know how the internal mechanisms of it function. You just know how they want it to look. And when you're in a community full and led by women, this is what happens to young males. So when I look at something like American Gods and I see this kind of dynamic playing out, where you have white society and mainstream culture venerating the black woman, especially after last year, when we were told, whether it was the cover of Time, whether it was the cover of Rolling Stone, that black women were going to save us. They are the moral pulse of the nation. They're going to vote us into the right president that's going to guide us all the way, and completely ignored the black men who were dying, the black men who were voting at the second highest levels for Democrats, even though they never got any credit for it, and they faced a level of voter disenfranchisement that no other group faces. All of that was dismissed under the rug and altogether. There was no place for it. So now there's this veneration of the highest quality of the black woman, the highest possibility of her existence, which in imagination is the goddess, as if the god does not exist. And when we do see him, you wouldn't even know you saw him. Watching American Gods, you wouldn't know. They never named him. He never spoke. Any of the two that I showed didn't speak, didn't have any presence. Now maybe that'll change next season, I don't know. And they did have black gods on before, but one of the interesting things about it is none of those gods had any connection directly to African American lineage. None of them really did. We, in a Pan-Africanist sense, connect them because they some were from ancient Egypt, some were from Africa directly, but it's an interesting thing. So you have a number of characters that play off of African Americans, like Shadow Moon himself, played by Ricky Whittle, but neither the actor nor the character has a direct connection to African American culture. So there's a slight that's happening there that I cannot ignore. But there are those who are well ensconced in those philosophies that can articulate that far better than I, But the gender component is where my work tends to reside. When I deal with black men, I am talking about, I center it on ADOS men. I also connect it to other black men. I think there is a larger black experience, but at the same time, I think there's an ADOS experience that gets swept under the rug far too often, and it's happening here as well. But I also have to say, in terms of gender, I find a downplaying of the black male presence, or what I call the sacred black masculine, a downplaying of it altogether. And this is why I do this. On my weekly live show, I have in the beginning, most weeks, I start with an example of the sacred black masculine. I start with an example of a black male doing something that we're not stereotypically credited for doing. I start with that to show that it happens on a regular basis, and that black men are responsible for all kinds of, if we put it in a metaphysical context, godly acts. They get downplayed and ignored on a regular basis. So this is why I rehearse them. This is why I focus on them, because nobody else does. And I want brothers in this space to know that the capacity for us to express our highest form of expression happens every day. And I want us to be able to talk about it unapologetically. But if we go straight to pure metaphor, if we go straight to pure metaphysics, what I do find in today's culture is a serious downplaying. The best of what we are imagined to be is what you heard with Dr. Hare at the beginning of this report, at the beginning of this episode, this video. We are the warrior drones. We are expected to die for our queens. And that's it. You ever see how a bee stings somebody? It can't remove its stinger from the skin when it stings you. So when it flies away, the stinger remains and it pulls out its intestines. So the bee quickly dies after it stings. This is what it means to protect your queen. You do so at the loss of life, but that's okay because you're a warrior drone. Were you a king, then the preservation of your life would take on a whole new meaning, and we can't have that because you can't be prioritized. Prioritizing black males is an inherently sexist act. It is inherently toxic. It is inherently negative, right? It is a reinforcement of a patriarchy that never existed in Black America, but is propagated as such. So we can align ourselves with white societies and point out how bad patriarchy is, but Black communities never had any such thing. But now we have a queenship. We have a gynocracy, which I define as a female patriarchy, which is very different from a matriarchy. But nevertheless, we see it reinforced in popular culture. And these are your goddesses. These are the ones that constantly call in to Kevin Samuel's show and point out every week how they deserve a high value 1% man, regardless of whether or not they bring anything to the table. And it has never crossed their mind to even ask, what do those elite and rare men, because rarity, that always determines value in any context, right? How available something is determines its value. The reason that we have high value whatever is based on rarity. So here you have people where I think it's safe to say you got 90% of the women that call into Kevin's show that want the top 5% of men. And they all believe they're worthy of it. Why? Because they're queens and they're goddesses. And we're drones. That's whether you make $20,000 a year, whether you're unemployed, or whether you make $300,000 a year, you are still a drone in their imagination. And shows like this only exacerbate that idea. You have no worth. And Black men don't even require much. I mean, at the end of the day, most Black men, all they really want is some modicum of respect. They search the world looking for women who can respect what they bring to the table. And there are plenty of brothers that bring quite a bit, especially when you measure what they bring against the statistics on all men. There are plenty of brothers that bring more than the average, and they are still treated like something off of many a Black woman's shoe. I don't think this is the case across the board by any measure, but I'm not going to argue it isn't to make people feel better. I'm not, because this shit happens and it's real. And we're seeing it play out in myth and metaphor and media, and we see it supported and celebrated. And so along with the celebration of the veneration of the Black woman and the Black goddess is simultaneously the celebration of the downplaying and the underdevelopment of the Black god. But if you want to take it out of the metaphorical, if you want to take it out of the metaphysical, it works the same way. Veneration of the woman, downplaying and underdevelopment of the male. From boyhood to manhood, from boyhood to eldership, the boys are played down and dismissed. There are no policies that look to support them. No practices, no laws. I mean, we've even seen in the last week how many Black men get killed, beat up, arbitrarily arrested, pepper sprayed, dismissed. Now we can sit up in here and say, well, Black men just got to fix it themselves. Well, you know what? I agree. We have no other choice, but it's not realistic. Any other successful group we see that we attempt to measure ourselves against has had a great deal of assistance. By policy, by government, local, statewide, national, they've all had support. Every group you want to measure Black men against has had support. They didn't do it on their own. But Black men are supposed to. Well, I think it's bullshit, but I will say at the same time, we don't have a choice. That I agree with. So we got to do what we got to do, fellas. And the first thing I start with is pointing out examples so that we become aware of them and we don't let them slide into our unconscious, our subconscious without reflection. I don't want that to happen anymore because I grew up doing it. And what you learn to do is you learn to rehearse your inferiority because that's what you're fed a steady dose of. I want us to be aware of what it is we're being shown, and I want us to be able to tell our sons what it is so that they can spit it out. I hope you'll join me in doing so, and I hope you will help me warn people about the importance of vomiting up this disgusting poison of black male inferiority, whether it be literal or metaphorical. Peace.